Hey, Chris. Welcome back to the Mindful Mama podcast. So glad you're here.
Thank you, Mindful Mama. It's so fun to be back and be connected. Yeah.
For the listener who hasn't listened, we've done a number of episodes and a bunch of mindfulness for kids episodes. They
hmm
are all there in the archives. Just search for Mindfulness for Kids on mindfulmamamentor.com. You can find all of them. They're really awesome with Chris. But I'm so excited to talk to you. You have two awesome books that have just come out. Feelings Are Like Farts, which we'll talk about, and College Mental Health 101.
I think like opposite sides of the spectrum, but maybe the humor relates to everybody. Oh, yeah.
I love that title. We're gonna get to those, but I kind of want to start with right now you're feeling it. Like probably everyone in your world, we're all feeling kind of some instability
hmm
in the world. And then for parents, we've got like all these constant demands and then just kind of life. And then it gets to this sort of world chaos. So I just wanted to talk to you a bit and about that and think about how, ask you how mindfulness can help parents through this tumultuous time. Because I know it's helping me, but how can it help parents in general?
I mean, I think just in terms of our own like just regulation through all of this, when it is like from the micro, our own nervous systems to the global nervous system, basically everyone feels off balance and kind of buzzing and uncertain with, where are things going, what's happening, in addition to the usual family chaos, parenting chaos. I think for many of us and probably your listeners too, the kind of sandwich generation chaos of, chasing my kids and also driving my parents to appointments and just all of this kind of going on in the backdrop of the world, what's happening in education, what's happening with the climate, what's happening with politics, what's happening in our schools. Like it is just so much. And so to be able to connect or reconnect with that still, as my friend Amy Saltzman says, that still quiet place inside of ourselves and stay connected. And I think just with things like just acts of kindness, acting locally, things seem globally enormous, but how can we act within our families as a microcosm for kindness and compassion and mindfulness? And then within the larger community in these different ways, it really does ripple out. It's like one of my favorite kind of pieces of research is the way that kindness ripples out like 3 or 4 degrees of separation. Just seeing an act of kindness, we're more likely to be kind. What kindness does to the brain in terms of balancing our serotonin and releasing dopamine and oxytocin. And it's just like just little acts of kindness, I think, and taking those moments when we can catch a breath here or a moment to listen to sounds there or practice some mindfulness more formally, I think is, as always, more needed than ever. And I'm preaching to the choir, but
Yeah, I know, but it can be, I know that for me anyway, I read about mindfulness for 10 years before I actually was able to sit down and do a meditation practice. So I know there's like a bunch of listeners who listen and they're like, yeah, that sounds really nice, but it's hard. It's simple, right? It's simple, but not easy. And so, I mean, if we're trying to be steady in this instability of the world, what, or at least for you, like what are things that you are holding on to keep you steady when things are really unstable kind of in general and people you talk to are like, oh my gosh, the world, right?
right.
What are you holding on to specifically to kind of keep you grounded through that? Like, I love the idea of the acts of kindness, but I'm just curious also about personal habits.
Yeah, to me, one thing I've been struck with, I was listening to a podcast right at the beginning of the year. Ezra Klein was talking about sort of his New Year's resolutions or kind of intentions, and he said something I thought really stuck with me, which is, a question of like not just what are we doing for self-care, but what are we doing to relax? And that those two things are really different. And it's been a real challenge for me, like, because I think of self-care, like what's good for me, and it's like go to the gym. But for me, like I end up being like, well, I ran 2 miles yesterday, I got to run 3 miles today, or even meditations, like I sat for 20 minutes yesterday, I should do 25 minutes today, or I just get so doing, even about things that are supposed to be being, or it's like, oh, I'll read a book. Well, how fast can I read the book? I want to read another book. I got to read the sequel. Like, it's just
Achievement mode.
so achievement mode, exactly. And stepping out of that, like, what really is relaxation? That's been one of my mantras for the year. And it's like, just really trying to get away from my phone, number one, like, leave it in the mudroom when I'm hanging out, for the evening with the kids, don't check the news after 8, try not
Mm,
to pick it get up in the morning, take a walk without my phone, spend time in nature. These kinds of things I think have been really nurturing, sustaining for me. Listening to stand-up comedy has been really helpful, going to see it. I find, like listening to music is wonderful for me, but if there's music, then I'm near my phone, and then that just helps me feel, ends up making me feel even more kind of scattered. So I think these things, but nature has been really helpful for me, and time with the family in really kind of new fun ways. Just playing a board game or something like that just reminds me of, like, it's not mindfulness, but it really is like being in the moment. What's right in front of me, or maybe what's the, like, move I'm going to make in this backgammon game in 2 moves, but it's that's as far into the future as it goes. That stuff has been really sustaining as well.
Yeah, I'm like hearing you say boundaries, basically like boundaries around the onslaught of information and kind of limiting your time where you're connected to the device, like connected to the news and all the different things. I mean, I think that is really the information overload and the fact that we don't have filters that have caught up with this, right? It's just more and more and more. It just keeps getting more and more and more. And also it's like only all news and information at a certain, like, sort of national level. Like, I'm not necessarily getting all the news like in my town
Hmm.
or in my state or with my neighbors. You know what I mean? Like, and it seems like everyone I know is very clued in, very in touch for good reason. Like, there's a lot of instability of what's happening, but it's also like what isn't happening. Am I not, I'm not maybe paying attention to my, yeah, you got to hold paying attention to my more immediate environment of neighbors and towns and states. And is it helping everyone? Is it helping you?
Right.
Who is it helping for you to be so, yeah, to not have some boundaries around this onslaught, I guess. I mean, because it's seen as like a virtuous to be really know what's going on. It's seen as
Yeah.
virtuous, but there's a problem with it, and it is the overwhelm, and there is like the feeling like your life is miserable and worthless.
Right, right. And we feel so helpless, and that kind of learned helplessness when it's information overload, flood the zone with information, misinformation and confusion. And one thing I was thinking about, I was giving a talk recently sort of about addiction and simplicity, actually, at the local meditation center, and someone was talking about, the news and all of that. I was thinking about and I work a lot with addiction. It's part of my own history, my family history, but thinking, the news is its own form of intoxication. Like, it's also its own compulsive thing to, like, be checking it all the time. But it also, like, when it's so unbalancing and unpredictable and moving so fast, it also is like we really need to titrate it and moderate how much we're consuming, and really is like we could read the newspaper all day and feel terrible, or 5 minutes and feel terrible. And either way, we're helping. And I think sharing, with family, with friends, with relatives, getting text messages, this horrible thing, that horrible thing. One thing I've taken to doing for myself is, like, I'm not going to share like bad news with somebody unless I'm also sharing what I'm going to try to do about it. Like,
Mm.
I'm worried about the environment, but I'm also going to like go to this event about, caring for a local park or something like that, so that I feel like I am taking action and inviting people into action and not just into more panic or more overwhelm. And I don't get it right every time, but it's sort of an aspiration I'm trying to do, as well as just to kind of limit consumption of bad news. But then look, where's a local action I can take? Like, the environment is so important, nature to me, and there's, like, we live in the city, but they're doing like a maple syrup, like, boil down, like in the trees in the park. So it's like bring the kids to the park every week and picking up the maple syrup, and then a community event around that. And we can doom and gloom about the environment in this way and that. And we need to look at the bad news, but we also need to look at good news and the little micro that we are doing to help our kids appreciate what nature is offering us and our relationship to nature. And things like this, I feel like, are really, really important. And what are we doing with our own kids? What are we reading? What are we doing in our schools? I was just in a school last week talking about, like, trauma-informed education, and times of instability and unpredictability, and just being able to offer that kind of thing. Like, what is the little thing you can do in your classroom to make this space accessible to as many people as possible and helpful and healing to as many people as possible? I think when we think about that, taking action, because it looks so giant, some of the things that we're fearful
Yeah.
of, but those small actions I think are so important.
I like that. The small actions to create joy. Actually, it was interesting. Like this last Saturday, my neighbor two doors down was out like aggressively weeding the ivy in the path that's like in the neighborhood near my house, and she was doing it twofold to help like do something good in the neighborhood, but also to
Yeah.
like aggressively weed and like get her frustrations out. And I
Such
was
a
like,
soul. Like,
yeah, I was like dressed, as I looked over at her, I was dressed in like a glittery skirt because I was having friends over to have a Scottish dancing house party. And
nice.
so I thought we're making small pockets of like goodness in different ways, right? Like I'm like trying to just kind of have some joy in a
Right. Right.
chaotic time, and she's
Yeah.
like, getting rid of invasives, and it's both really good. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
In doing
Well,
what we're good at. Like, you're great at hosting, you're great at having a party and apparently Scottish dance, right? And this woman's great at gardening and making things beautiful. I think, looking at like what are the gifts that we each have to offer, and for each of us it's different what we can do to make the world a better place or try to. And I think remembering that too.
yeah, and I think both of us have a practice of, mindfulness meditation where we sit in stillness
Hmm.
every day or close to that, right? Like pretty regularly. And I find that is, I can notice. I did this morning. I read the news before. Sometimes I do before, sometimes I do after. And before today, and I was like, oh, I could like see this agitated energy all throughout, and then I could feel it calm down just over the course of that period of silence, and focus on the present moment. And yeah, and I imagine you're feeling you well, tell me about your practice. What does that look like?
Yeah, and it is, I mean, it's truly different every day. Like, often, the when we're recording this, the clocks just changed, but I was like, great, because I was the first one up in the morning for a while and getting my practice in. And now since the clocks have changed, like my son is now up earlier, and it's like, okay, sometimes we practice together, but it's gotten a bit harder. But one of the things I think that's important to remember about mindfulness and a formal meditation practice is like, I can't remember where I heard this, but like we don't sit in stillness just to be good at being still. We sit in stillness so that when it's time for a skillful movement and action, we're ready for it and we know what it is. We don't sit in silence to get good at being quiet. We sit in silence so that we can be thoughtful and intentional and powerful in terms of how we speak in a mindful way that really does have an impact when it's time to speak up and with a certain kind of voice. And that to me, I think, is such a reminder when things feel really chaotic. Like, it is about stillness and it's about silence for themselves, but it's also about stillness and silence so that we can, move with skill and we can speak with skill. And that I think is such a useful reminder as well when we're feeling overwhelmed and sitting feels hard and what's the point and I should be taking action, or I should be speaking up, and both can be true. What mindfulness reminds us of is that we can hold complicated ideas, seemingly contradictory ideas at the same time, and that's the gift. And I think especially in times that are polarized and everyone is kind of looking at things in black and white, or you're this or you're that, or you're good or you're bad, mindfulness actually helps us to hold things are complicated. That doesn't mean, of kind of both sidesism, but it means like, let's get curious where there is a both and that exists. And I think that kind of wisdom is so needed right now.
Yeah, yeah. To see the complexity of things and to be curious about where are you coming from. I mean, I think of that, obviously that applies in sort of a larger news related circumstance, but also in our parenting, right?
Hmm.
We struggle with our reactivity. Parents struggle with our reactivity, losing our patience, raising our voices, and then we feel guilty about it. And I think for me anyway, the mindfulness practice helps me to just get in that moment and be in the discomfort of it and to feel like this is like that both and kind of thing. This is that, okay, let me, if I can be curious in this moment, what can I see? What can I, rather than making a decision, a gut decision and reacting from it, can I get into that thoughtful part of my brain? And I was wondering if you had for parents, maybe parents who aren't interested in a formal meditation practice, some practical mindfulness techniques that can help them respond with less reactivity, more awareness, more compassion.
Absolutely. I mean, I think number one, that kind of how do we get curious, about people we disagree with, whether it's relatives or in politics or whether it's our kids in front of us. And again, I feel like I'm just quoting Ezra Klein here, but he was saying something about like, curiosity over contempt, right? And when we are calm, I would add to this, like we're able to get curious. And I learned recently, maybe it was Judd Brewer or Richie did, someone did a study recently on curiosity in the brain actually shuts off anxiety. It shuts off that kind of amygdala limbic system
Mm.
response. So learning how to activate curiosity. What's behind my child's behavior? Are they at the basics, hungry, angry, lonely, and tired? Or are they, something else going on, right? And like all the good kind of parenting, how to listen so kids will talk, talk so kids will listen, right? We validate, it sounds like you're feeling angry, it sounds like this, or I wonder if you're feeling this, right? When we're able to do that and the child's able to settle, right? They get curious, we get curious, things really do start to shift in terms of the energies. But again, it keeps coming back to us. It's like, we got to find ways to regulate ourselves so that we in turn co regulate so that then the kids are regulating themselves. And so to me, a story I've been telling a lot recently is this dad I worked with who like super high special needs kid, super burned out, high pressure job, him and his wife. And, he was just like a wreck, after this kid was born in the first few ye'ears. And, we sort of finished up our therapy at the time and I was like, what was the most helpful thing we did? And he was like, we like had all these sessions, but the most helpful thing was like I would drive home, as fast as I could, park in the driveway and just pause in the driveway and take 3 breaths before I stepped out of the car. And then sometimes just feel my feet as I walked into the house. And when I would come home with that sort of emotional energy, I wasn't always bringing calm, but at least I wasn't bringing more chaos into the
Mm.
house.
Mm-hmm.
And the nanny would be less likely to run out the door. I'd be less likely to snap at my wife. She'd be less likely to snap at me, right? And it really is like, how do we take these moments that we do have, because we don't have a lot, right? Maybe sometimes it is just parking the car in 3 breaths or reflecting, if we have a partner, which not all of us do in our parenting at the end of the day, what did work today? What are some of our successes today? What growth did we see? Oh my gosh, he did his homework without complaining this week. Like, whoa, what? Like taking that time to look at the positive, almost like a little gratitude kind of practice, finding these moments, I think, which is really hard to do because a lot of us don't have 20 minutes to sit on a cushion because it's, drop off and then it's off to work and then it's coming home and cooking dinner and then it's, so it really is hard to find these moments. But I think this is where a community of other parents, a spiritual community, or just one other parent can also be a useful reminder. It is so much easier to practice in community, reminding each other, not in a passive aggressive way, but to breathe. Like, let's breathe together. Not like, Hunter, you better take a breath, right? But like finding those moments to practice together. And by together, I mean together with our kids, but also with our co-parents, when they're available and interested, or the other people in our kind of village of parenting that we have. Maybe if we have a book group, we're reading a little bit more about this and taking a moment of mindfulness as we start our book group. I'm saying that because I just started a book group with some friends last week. But that these are some other ways to start to make it practical because it is really hard to like sit down for 20 minutes. I
Mm-hmm.
used to joke when my kids were little, I'd get like 22 minutes, during Daniel Tiger for my my meditation practice.
That's
But
perfect. Daniel
yeah,
Tiger
it's a pretty
22.
good amount of time, right? With Daniel Tiger in the back.
It's weird though, like somehow we have time for, I don't know how much time we spend on like social media or Instagram, right? Like we do fit that in. It is harder to just remember, I think, to even if it's harder to just remember to stop and just pause and take a breath than it is it's much easier, it's much, there's just the strongest, the smartest social psychologists in the world are working on the devices to make us
Right,
reach for
right.
that before we don't reach for that and just sit quietly, right? So it can be hard. I love that idea though of 3 breaths maybe before you get in the house.
Hmm.
That's really lovely. One way you talked about practicing with each other, and one way my daughter is pretty anti-mindfulness. I'm having grown up with the mindful mama
It's
mentor,
in
although she,
mindfulness now. We'll
for
see.
now,
Those seeds are planted. I have no doubt.
for now. But the one thing she does appreciate is, and this is a practice from the Plum Village tradition, is the 3 breath hug. So I say, "Hey, do you want a 3 breath hug?" And she just leans her whole body into me, and we just do these 3 deep breaths. And it's so nice because it's like a hugging meditation. What could be nicer?
Right.
But also for her to just pause and, to get all those good body chemicals that you get from the hugging and things like that. But later on, I'll tell her that that's actually a mindfulness practice. So
Guess what?
you didn't know, but you were doing it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, so one thing I wanted to ask you about is the idea. I got asked about this recently, like gentle parenting, and I was wondering, it's like kind of like it's gained a lot of traction in
Hmm.
recent years. This idea of gentle parenting, and I was wondering, how do you see mindfulness fitting into this approach, and do you see any like downsides maybe to it too? I'm curious about what you think about it.
I mean, I had a very funny conversation with blanking on her name. I feel terrible. Jessica Gross from the New York Times Parenting a while back about
Mm.
this. And this sort of, I mean, I think like everything, every parenting approach, right? We want to hold it lightly and not become like ideologues about it. I spend some time sort of like lurking in different like, Facebook parenting groups, gentle parenting, responsive parenting, this parenting, that parenting. And it's like the funny thing is it's like, is I just feel like with all these things it's like human beings get involved and just like watching these parents like shame each other into like you're not being gentle enough in your gentle parenting approach. And it's like why are we like treating each I think it's like all these things we want to just make sure we are practicing these principles in all aspects of our lives, not just in parenting, but in terms of how we treat other people. Like if we are trying to teach our kids lessons without using shame, we need to remember that when we're talking to friends or peers or people we disagree with or colleagues or our co-parent or other people in our lives. So I think we just want to be careful about that. But I do think fundamentally, to me, mindfulness is about it's and I think gentle parenting itself also it's not like all like soft and squishy. It's got like when it's practiced correctly, it's got like a firmness to it. Like mindfulness is a discipline and it's about softening in some ways, but it's not about softening and dissolving boundaries. It's about maintaining boundaries, gently bringing our awareness back to our breath and gently sort of setting that boundary with our own wandering mind like a puppy.
Yeah, we're very insistent with our own minds as we practice, right? So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. And that's where compassion and self-compassion, I think, come in. It's like, to me, mindfulness and some of these practices are just like a microcosm. Like, if I can be halfway nice and patient with myself when my mind wanders off, right, like a puppy, then I'm more likely to be able to do that when I make a bigger mistake in my life. I'm also more likely, hopefully, to do that with my own child when they make a mistake, to in a non-shaming way invite them to come back or gently correct them, but maybe validate them first and then offer a gentle suggestion, or validate first and then invite them to come up with their own solution. So I think they all kind of like fit together in all of that. Yeah.
Yeah,
But I
I
think
think they fit together too. I worry about the idea. The thing I worry about is parents just like losing themselves trying to fit this role.
yes.
Like just
Right.
trying to be this perfect mom or perfect dad or caregiver,
Yeah.
whatever you are, and just, even your voice changes when you talk to your kid and you have no sense of humor.
Right. Right.
Doing everything for this child and never and modeling any doing anything for yourself, and just that whole, I think that's what I worry about sometimes as people dive deep into an ideologue or a concept like that.
Exactly. And I think like parenting is about making mistakes and not having to be perfect. And I think a lot about like I think to me, the ideal is like, I lose it on my kids. And what I hope is that when I lose it, I'm able to then own it and apologize. I got super annoyed at my daughter. We were on a plane flight and I kept thinking she was pressing something in the iPad, whatever. Like, and I was like, you got to stop doing that. She's like, I'm not. And then I realized like I was wrong. And I was like, I got to apologize. And it's like, but I do feel like I lost it and I had to apologize, A, because I was wrong and didn't listen to her, and B, because like, I overreacted. But it's like, actually, if the kids don't experience any conflict or witness any conflict, they actually never learn how to resolve conflict.
Mm-mm.
So like, I grew up with parents who were super conflict averse. I literally never saw them fight. And so when I first like ran into conflicts, it was terrifying for me because I thought it was the end of the world if I disagreed with somebody. It's actually important, like as parents, to get into. It's actually okay for parents to get into conflict with each other, right? As long as we model in front of the kids how we come back together. Like, so you can argue with your spouse, but just try to apologize in front of the kids too. These things I feel like, and research backs that up, and that's been really helpful for me, and also humbling when it's like, okay, I got to apologize for like, losing my temper and snapping at my wife a little bit.
And
But it
they're all
really
gonna
is.
watch.
But it's like then they'll learn how to apologize and they'll learn how to accept an apology and they'll learn that you can make a mistake and reconnect afterwards. And even with them, right? My parents were also very gentle. And the first time a boss yelled at me, I was like about to burst into tears at work. And it was like, I don't want to be like, I wish my parents had yelled at me more, but there is a little bit like when we become too conflict averse and kind of pad everything of our kids, sort
Mm.
of snowplow, parenting, I think, and, bubble wrap parenting, it's not ultimately helpful for building resilience and taking a couple of the knocks that are inevitable in life. So we want to be cautious about that too, not deliberately putting our kids into harm's way, but helping them process difficult things and not being protective and even overprotective in our own family or feeling guilty. I mean, it's like we all lose it. It's okay. Like, I mean, we're gonna feel guilty, but then it's what do we do with it? Do we try to do better next time? Do we try to make it up to them in a healthy modeling way?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like every environment has to be perfectly emotionally safe, right? Or like it's like it has to be safe enough. It has to be
Exactly.
not that there's no conflict, not that there's no disagreement,
Hmm.
not that there's no yelling, but it has, yeah, let's model it coming back. Let's model connecting again. Yeah,
And then we
yeah.
come back stronger.
Hmm.
Anytime, I mean, there's sort of the metaphor, it's like you break a bone, it grows back stronger. But like a little bit like you have a little like rift with your kid, you work on it, it comes, hopefully it's stronger at that point afterwards.
Yeah, actually that happened to me just recently with a friend. I went to go visit a friend and she did something that I was very hurt by, and I felt like really hurt and rejected. And then I told her after she came back, 'cause she went somewhere without me. And then I told her when she came back. And I was like proud of myself for telling her. And we had this lovely conversation where she was like, so, and I think it's made us stronger since then, right? Our relationship. And that's like with my friendships, that's always where I'm like the most scared of causing, having conflict or something like that. But yeah,
But what
it
a
does
great
make
model
us.
for our kids that like friends can feel left out, talk to each other about it, and resolve it. I mean, it's probably easier when we're, in our middle age than when we're 7 or 10 or
I know,
15.
but it would have been easier for me to just be like, okay, I'm out of here. I'm getting a hotel room too. Okay, I want to know about Feelings Are Like Farts. I think this is the best book title ever. Oh my God.
I am so psyched. So in the pandemic, like 5 years ago, thank God. But like a friend of mine texted me, was like, my daughter just said, feelings are like farts. Like, isn't that so funny? We should write a book about it. And I was like, yeah, maybe. And then like a week later, I was like, oh my God, that's such a good idea. And I was like out taking a walk. And I just remember this so vividly. We like over text message, we were like just writing this book like back and forth and took us maybe like 45 minutes. While I was supposed to be out enjoying nature, I just, opened this podcast with how great it is to be in nature, right? But texting my friend furiously about this, we ended up sending it out to publishers. We had like a bidding war with six different publishing
Wow.
houses, which had never happened. A book that I wrote in like
Congratulations.
5 minutes got a better advance than anything I spent years on. And then it's been like 5 years of like different editors and changing presses and delays and all this stuff, but we are like, finally we are here, with it out. So, and it's just like, I mean, it's just what it says. Like, it's just little lessons, like, feelings and farts, they can be silent, but they're never deadly. And if they ever, hurt too much, you should talk to an adult that you trust.
Oh,
Around good friends, they can just make you laugh and they're no big deal, but sometimes you just have to sit with them even if they stink. Like, just that kind of, if you think back, sometimes it's from, something earlier in the day. It's
that's
just like
brilliant.
40
It
parts
has
out,
the
basically.
whole digestion in there. That's so great. Oh my God.
So we are just so pumped about that, and I think the fact that it's been, I think, literally 5 years since we got the first contract, it's like, oh my gosh, finally. So we've already, of course, like, we'll see how well the book does or not, but it's so easy to write. Like, we actually wrote a sequel, so we'll see whether we'll get Farts Are Like Feelings 2 out at some point. But yeah, no, it was
Well,
so much fun.
feelings are like farts. I mean, come on, you guys, you have to go get this book if you have little kids. What little kid is not going to love the metaphor of feelings are like farts? You get to have a whole book and talk about farts. And you're talking about feelings. It's so brilliant. It's like satisfies both the children and the adults. You're talking about both feelings and farts.
Exactly. Well, and it's like adults could. I was like, maybe we should write like a like grown up self help version of it too.
Yeah, you should.
Just like a bunch of chapters on like why they linger but they don't last and they always,
Oh,
actually fade away and all these kinds of, if you hold them in too long, they can end up really exploding. So yeah, we'll see. But it was so much fun to do and very different than, oh, I was sort of joking. It's like I wrote like alpha breaths and some books about breathing for kids. So it's like I've got the air going in books and now I've got the air going out the other side, kind of, I've got the whole picture there, the whole cycle.
and you also have coming out College Mental Health 101, which is so perfect because my daughter is about to go to college this fall. So I can't wait for it to arrive in the mail. I'm like waiting.
Graduation present.
It's a graduation present. Perfect.
We are psyched about this one. I mean, it came out of, I can't remember what of my story you remember, what I've shared on our podcast or in conversations or your guests or your listeners anyway, but I went off to college. It took me 6 years to graduate. I took 2 years off with like, anxiety, depression, addiction was just a total walking train wreck. And actually, it's when I was away taking time off that I found mindfulness, went on a retreat with Thich Nhat Hanh, got some therapy, got sober, all these other kinds of things. So it's always been near to my heart. And then I worked in universities for many years. Um, and so it finally felt like about the right time as sort of like the conversation has grown around mental health in young people, the number of people, kids going off to college, like academically prepared, but struggling with mental health. So many kids dropping out, taking time off, all that. So these kids we felt like really needed, I get questions all the time. And so this younger woman I'm friends with, we went to the same college, it turns out. So she's one of the co-authors. Another friend of mine, Blaise Aguirre, he's a psychiatrist. We have a psychiatrist, a psychologist, and a
He'll
social
be on the
worker.
podcast soon, dear listener, too. Blaise
Oh,
Aguirre.
amazing.
There
Awesome.
you
Yeah,
go.
he's great. Yeah, totally. He's got his new book here. And yeah, so, it's really like we interviewed hundreds of students, professional, just sort of like 150 questions, starting with like, do I pick a small school or a big school? Do I say in my college essay about this to like, getting to college, like how and when do I tell my roommate? Should I keep my therapist from home on Zoom or should I find a new therapist? To how do I support my roommates? How do I support my friends? What are resources I can find? How do I manage sports? Like, and then kind of what are some different common mental health issues, including like, what does it look like from the outside? Like if I'm worried about someone, like how do I tell, is this ADD or is this they're drinking too much? Like what might I hear coming out of their mouth? What does it feel like? How do I tell if I'm depressed or if this is a trauma reaction to something, or both. So hopefully it's really empowering for students, for their families, for deans, for RAs, for students who just want to be supportive of their friends. So we're really hoping it's a resource. It's the one that I bet my parents wish they'd had 25 years ago when I called home at 3 in the morning, like, I'm a mess, come pick me up. And we just hope it's helpful to young people, because there's not really anything else on that topic, and it's so big and it's such a hard time, and yet such a great time to learn the skills that you need for how to care for yourself, what kind of therapy works for me, how do I support friends, how do I ask for the help that I need, what's a reasonable way to ask for help, and not, interviewing somebody and she was like, well, you can talk to the accommodations office, but not everyone's going to get like, an off-campus single and like a, gluten-free bakery and a puppy, every time are feeling anxious. Like, what is a reasonable accommodation? So I hope it's really helpful to young people, and I just so much love working with that age group. So yeah.
Well, I know you're the perfect person to write that for them because you can really, see and feel, what they're going through. That's so beautiful. Okay, just to end on like a positive action note, if a parent wants to start practicing mindfulness with their child today, what's one small, simple thing they could do right now to make an impact?
Yeah, I mean, I would say bring it to something that you're already doing. And that doesn't mean like we're gonna do a mindful eating, but just like let's think about where this food came from. Like it came from the store, and before that it came from the farm, and people worked on the farm, and it grew in the sunshine, and it grew in the soil, like that kind of thing. I think also, like, my son goes back and forth with mindfulness. He's a real athlete, so he really is excited to see professional athletes practicing mindfulness, and so he now likes to practice before his soccer games to kind of keep focused during that. But I think bring it into something that you're doing, and I think not even calling it mindfulness. Like, if you are going for a walk in nature, just being like, I wonder how many different bird sounds there are, rather than like, we're going to take a mindful walk and notice how all the sounds. Like, I wonder, like, inviting them in, how many different shades of green do you notice? I'm seeing so many right now. Can we walk really quietly and not make a sound, and maybe we can get closer to the animals so they won't fly away or run away?
Well, that's good motivation.
Yeah, and then afterwards maybe we, like with your daughter, hey, that was mindfulness all along. So those are some ways too.
By the time this comes out, I recorded a podcast with my 18-year-old daughter, and it was really great, but like it was so satisfying because actually she's 18 now, and she admitted that she appreciated that I limited her screen time when she was little. I was like, yes,
I did something right.
did it. Okay. But yeah, maybe she'll probably appreciate the 3 breath hugs later. All right, awesome. Those are great tips. I love that. I want to go look for all the different greens I see now. That's really beautiful. As always, this was such a pleasure to talk to you, Chris. Dear listener, you can find Feelings Are Like Farts and College Mental Health 101 anywhere books are sold. And yeah, you just have to get Feelings Are Like Farts if you have little ones. I mean, what an amazing book. I love that. Thank you so much for coming on the Mindful Mama podcast. Once again, Chris, it's always a pleasure. Where can people find you if they want to?
Yep, I'm just drchristopherwillard.com, like drchristopherwillard.com. You can very easily Google me, although there is another author in Canada with my same name. You can also find me at enlightenedlivelihoods.com, which is sort of like, speaking and consulting, and Instagram and Facebook at Dr. Chris Willard, Dr. Chris Willard. You can find me there too. We usually do like little daily, monthly little challenges and prompts and stuff for people. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, it's been so fun to talk, and I know we'll talk again sometime soon. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast again today, and thank you for everything you're doing.
Oh, thank you. And thanks for having me, and the amazing work you're doing in the world too, raising better humans, which is really what we need. So thank you.
Yeah, we're doing it together.